Hey Apex Agents, it's Mobius Y here with another video for Mass Effect Andromeda's multiplayer, kicking off 2018 with another two-part character build guide. And today we're looking at the Common Grade Human Engineer. I don't know why I didn't do a build guide for these characters a long time ago, because I've had the male at level 20 for actually several months. So I guess I kind of forgot about him, but I also don't understand why this guy isn't played more in pubs, because he is extremely powerful, both the male and female human engineer. They are a little more weapon dependent. This particular build, I should say, is a little more weapon dependent than other caster classes. If you're using something that's kind of out of place, like a Disciple shotgun or a Vanquisher sniper rifle, it doesn't really synergize too great with the playstyle or power synergy that you are trying to incorporate with the build, And if you're also just using a crappy gun over a good gun, for example, a Phalanx pistol over either the Roserad or, say, the Charger S, then again, your effectiveness is going to drop significantly. So we're just going to break it down going into the powers, and I'll go over the equipment and consumables that I used later. This build is focused on basically completely nuking small clusters of enemies at a very fast pace. The damage output is extremely good with the powers combination as well as the passive bonuses that you get, especially from the offensive tech passive bonuses to your powers there. Your powers do significant damage. The combos that you do with them do significant damage. And if you have a good weapon, you can keep dishing out good damage, provided that you're not using a piece of shit, to be totally honest. So starting off with a breakdown of the powers, the human engineers get Cryo Beam as their initial active power. This is kind of your go-to combo primer. Because the other power, Overload, doesn't really prime nearly as well. That's kind of your detonator. But Cryo Beam is a great primer. It's a great debuffer, especially against armor. It also slows enemies, and it can actually do some damage on appropriate characters with good power damage boosts. So took this all the way up to rank 6. Rank 4, I went with the 30% reduction in recharge speed, which is really handy. Rank 5, I took the radius upgrade. The Brittle Freeze with the plus 65% armor defense debuff, that is significant. That is a lot. And it tacks on with the initial 50% armor debuff that Cryo Beam automatically has. So it's basically a 115% armor debuff. So it is a huge debuff against bosses and sub-bosses if you take this Brittle Freeze option. But the rank 5 radius, for what you're going for what I was particularly going for, I should say, with this character build, the rank 5 radius upgrade is the way to go. Because in order to be able to quickly freeze solid small clusters of enemies, or slow small clusters of enemies, or just deal damage to small clusters of enemies, you need to be able to hit all of them with a single cast of Cryo Beam, and not have to try and hit each and every single one of them with enough of the beam's sustained output in order to actually snap freeze them. I'm not really wording it very well, but simply put, if you have 4 enemies tightly packed together, normally you only have the 2 or so seconds that you have to cast Cryo Beam to try and freeze solid all of them by targeting each one individually. You simply can't do that. It's pretty much impossible because you need to put the beam on them for too long of a time. You'll maybe get 2 of them. But with the radius upgrade here, you can freeze solid all of them just by targeting one guy, and the nearby enemies are affected as well. The beam freezes targets in a small radius around its impact point. It does exactly that, and it's super awesome. Rank 6, the snap freeze choice is the way to go, because this essentially creates any sub-bosses, or more importantly mooks, that are frozen solid, and turns them into a very small bomb, basically. Shattering frozen targets causes additional damage to nearby foes and snap freezes nearby defenseless enemies. So enemies without armor or shields will also be snap frozen if they are caught within these micro explosions. They get plus 200% frozen shatter damage, plus 100% frozen shatter force, and plus 150% frozen shatter radius. So this does huge damage when somebody is frozen solid, a mook or a sub-boss that does not have armor. When they are frozen solid and they die. They don't have to explode or anything like that from a combo or anything. They just have to die. So you can kill them by shooting them down with your bullets, or somebody else can kill them with a hail of bullets or with a different power altogether. Or when they die, when you cast Overload on somebody and set off a cryo combo, and then one of them dies, it just sets off a massive chain reaction where a group of enemies will die. And you'll see what I'm talking about in the gameplay. It's super cool. And we make that happen with the additional powers on this particular build. Assault turret, in order to make this super powerful, I had to sacrifice assault turret. There's really no way around it, to include maximum survivability and just the raw damage output of the usual, the frozen shattering combination. I put nothing into assault turret. It's not how I had this initially. I did play this character for a long time as a kind of a jack of all trades, or with a jack of all trades kind of build, but I didn't really like how it was going with the potential, especially. So I dropped the respec card when this guy was close to level 20, and I played him several times when he was level 20, so I was far more satisfied with making the sacrifice to assault turret. You don't want to forget that you have it. They'll throw it out here and there. I have a bad habit of forgetting that it even exists until I have no shields, and I just throw it out to start my shields to immediately start recharging, basically. Overload. This is your shield stripper, and this is also your detonator. Took this all the way to rank 6 for obvious reasons. Rank 4, you want the recharge speed reduction, plus 25% reduction in recharge speed. At rank 5, plus 60% damage versus shields. You want this one, definitely. It goes nicely with the rank 6 EMP upgrade, which does another plus 60% damage versus shields and plus 15% damage versus synthetics. So these two shield damage bonuses combined with another shield damage bonus in offensive tech, which you'll see in a minute here, it absolutely strips sub-boss shields and preps them for you to just hit them with a cryo beam immediately and freeze some of them solid. Normally, you would expect to go with the cryo beam and then overload combo in order to set off cryo explosions, or should I say cryo combos, as much as possible. But there's more times than not where if there's even one sub-boss in a small cluster of enemies, or if you're just facing off against a single sub-boss by itself, what's a good example? An Outlaw Pariah or a Ket Anointed or even a Ket Destined. You hit them with an overload and their shields are gone immediately. So you can start to hit them with the cryo beam, freeze them solid, and just prep them for an easy kill, as well as doing some area damage with the frozen shatter damage. So really handy way to strip shields very quickly. It's also super handy for dealing with things like shields on certain remnant bosses, like the Destroyer in particular, and other sub-bosses, what's the flying one? The Remnant Observer, for example. Offensive tech. So the power picks in this tech tree synergize super well with as I said, the combination of powers that you want to incorporate with the playstyle of this particular build. Rank 4, take the combo detonation damage, plus 50% all combo damage, plus 30% all combo radiuses. At rank 5, anti-shield, an additional plus 40% power damage bonus to shields. This ensures that sub-bosses on gold difficulty will have their shields stripped if hit with a charged or an uncharged overload. It does the job, absolutely. And at rank 6, elemental tech. Inflicting a status effect to enemies causes them to take more damage from heat, cold, and electricity. This is super handy for those few moments, which do happen in a single game, where your overload is not on cooldown and you do have a small group of enemies that are frozen. Even some sub-bosses could be part of it as well. And this basically means that your overload will do an additional 35% extra damage to the target, as well as if you charge it to chain it, it'll do a few additional points of damage to who it chains to. So looking at this objectively, let's say you come across a group of 3 enemies, and one of them is a sub-boss. Let's just say it's an Outlaw Pariah, and then you have 2 raiders next to him. You shoot the shields of the Pariah off, and then immediately hit them with the cryo beam. And the raiders are close enough where they initially get slowed, but then also frozen by the cryo beam. So now you have a de-shielded and partially health damaged outlaw pariah, frozen solid, with 2 raiders sitting nearby, and you have your overload ready to go. You charge up your overload, and your overload hits the pariah, setting off a cryo combo and also jumping to the 2 raiders. And then when the pariah dies, it also creates that shatter, that kind of, what's it called? That shatter mini explosion, the frozen mini explosion when the pariah dies. That damage from the cryo combo and the chain overload and the pariah's frozen shatter force transfers into all that damage being applied to the raiders as well, and it just sets off a chain reaction. If any other enemies run within the radius of their dead bodies as well, they will also take some damage from the bodies shattering. And if there's any other unprotected enemies, like more raiders that run into the range of the mini explosion, the shatter explosion, they will be snap frozen as well. So it's a huge amount of damage that gets done to a small group of enemies in a very, very rapid amount of time. And you'll see it in the gameplay. There's some small clusters of enemies, that just get absolutely nuked. Support systems. This was for survivability. Rank 4 went with the tech radius, plus 25% power area of effect radius. This is the important part. It increases the radius of your cryo beam. So it just makes it easier to catch multiple enemies that are packed, not super tight, but tight enough within a small radius. Rank 5, Advanced Construction. This does give plus 20% Tech Construct health, but more importantly, you get an additional plus 20% max health and max shields to your character as well. And at rank 6, Shield Reset. Once every 10 seconds, using a tech power causes shields to recharge immediately rather than after the standard delay. This is pretty huge, I feel, for survivability over the tech sabotage option. Hitting enemies with powers causes them to temporarily deal less damage. You could cause them to have a damage debuff of 30% for 8 seconds, or nearly indefinitely, if you are constantly hitting the same big boss with cryo beam and overload combos, for example. But I don't really feel that's as huge, because certain enemies, like bosses, for example, that down you in 2 or 3 hits will still down you in 2 or 3 hits if they are debuffed or not. So I didn't really see much point in that. The shield reset is way better for survivability, and this is why I say don't forget to throw your turret out now and then, because sometimes you'll find yourself running around, you are still quite healthy, but you've been de-shielded and just escaping from a fight. You're about to go into another one, so you just throw your turret in a random spot to start the shield regeneration process. Super handy that way. Plus, you get a little buddy that dishes out a little bit extra damage and can take some aggro off of you. So that's basically it for the power distribution. This setup gets more powerful if you don't have the human male engineer at grade 20. It just gets more powerful as you unlock more character cards for him too, because at grade 20, you get the additional 39% power damage bonus and 39% combo detonation damage. So again, going back to the example where you have a pariah plus 2 raiders, you have all this extra power damage being focused on a tight group of enemies, and it just absolutely nukes them and just wipes them from the board. So for the weapon in the game and on this particular build, nothing fancy, nothing spectacular. N7 Hurricane dumps out damage, especially at close range, and also is really good for applying ammo effects if you're using an ammo consumable, which I do recommend. Nothing fancy for the mods either, just pistol damage and pistol magazine mods. Very straightforward there. For equipment, I like the Omni capacitors because it reduces the cooldown by 15%. As well as increases tech power damage, which is super handy. So squeezing out even more tech power damage with the piece of equipment, as well as increasing the efficiency of your powers a little bit, which is super handy. And then for boosters in the gameplay, I went with a tech power amp, a grade 2 one in particular, just to squeeze out more power from my cryo beam and my overload. And I went with incendiary ammo grade 2 because I apparently have a lot of them. So I just threw that on to help deal with whatever armored bosses we came across in the mission. Incendiary ammo is pretty nice too, because you can use it to prime fire combos, which you can detonate with your overload detonator power. So That pretty much sums it up for the character build. Something I didn't really point out. The reason why I like going with both recharge speed reductions on Cryo Beam and Overload, despite the fact that Cryo Beam gets better recharge speed reductions, plus 10% and 30% reductions, and Overload only gets 10% and 25%, plus it also initially has a longer recharge time of 12 seconds over Cryobeam's 10 seconds, is the truth is that despite Cryobeam having technically 2 seconds lower recharge time than Overload, you're going to be casting Cryobeam for those extra 2 seconds almost every time you use it in order to set up a mini group nuke, basically. So you got to take that into account when you are figuring out whether or not you are okay with these differences in recharge time or not, because Cryo Beam, you can cast it for about 2 or 3 seconds, and you have to take that into account to the recharge time. So technically, Cryo Beam's recharge time is about 9 or 10 seconds with this particular build, and Overload's will be about 9 seconds. So they're very on par with each other. If you are using the combos at a constant rate, you'll find that the recharge times are extremely on par with each other. So when one power is ready to go, chances are the other one's ready to go as well if you are always using them in tandem. So that basically summarizes this character build. For part 2, where it shows gameplay on gold difficulty, check the link in the description below, where I rock this exact same build with these exact same pieces of equipment and boosters on a gold difficulty mission. So thank you very much for watching. This has been Mobius Y for Mass Effect Andromeda's multiplayer, and I will see you on the battlefield. Good luck, Apex.